Something interesting is happening right now. U.S. Navy warships moving through Caribbean waters off Venezuela. Military exercises. Show-off presence. The kind of thing that historically made governments nervous and compliant. Meanwhile, at rallies and press conferences, you've got strong rhetoric. Threats. Warnings. Get in line or face consequences. But here's what's fascinating. Watch the responses. UN summits. G20 meetings, regional conferences. World leaders aren't panicking. They're not scrambling. Many are just listening politely and then doing their own thing anyway. And in Moscow, Beijing, Brasilia, New Delhi, you've got different kinds of meetings happening. Quieter, less theatrical. Strategists discussing trade deals, currency swaps, infrastructure projects. No drama. Just business. Two very different approaches to influence playing out simultaneously. And the results? Well, that's what we're going to explore today. The world is shifting, not because someone evil is rising or someone good is falling, but because the conditions that created one system are changing into conditions that support different systems. Welcome to Eagle's View. I'm your host, broadcasting from Canada, and today we're looking at something most coverage misses: the mechanics of how global power structures evolve. No heroes, no villains, just patterns. Let's dive in. If you're new here, please subscribe so you can catch future episodes. I release these regularly and we're covering the shifts happening in real time. Also, I know watching global systems reorganize can be very unsettling. When you realize how much depends on decisions made far away by people you'll never meet, that can create real anxiety. I'm a coach who helps people transform their relationship with uncertainty to experience permanent peace of mind instead of panic. Not by ignoring reality, no, but by building genuine resilience. If that resonates, book a call with me. The link's in the description. Alright, so let's get into it. First, standard disclaimer. This is educational analysis based on publicly available information only. No classified sources. No insider knowledge. And remember, multiple interpretations of these events exist. This is one perspective. You're capable of forming your own. Please do it. To understand what's happening now, we need to rewind to 1945. Picture the world at the end of World War II. Europe, devastated. Cities in ruins, industrial capacity destroyed, economies shattered. Asia, Japan occupied and rebuilding. China in civil war. Much of the continent recovering from colonialism or conflict. The Soviet sphere, fighting off starvation and reconstructing from the Eastern Front. And then there is the United States. Untouched homeland. Industrial capacity intact and expanded. Gold reserves massive. Economy booming from wartime production. So when the question arose, whose currency should back international trade, there was really only one viable answer at that moment. Not because of ideology, not because of imperialism, simply because only one major economy was fully functional and stable. The Bretton Woods system emerged from that reality. The US dollar, backed by gold, became global reserve currency. Not through force, through practical necessity. Countries needed a stable medium for international trade, and the dollar was the only option that made sense at the time. And it worked. For decades, it worked brilliantly. Post-war reconstruction happened. International trade expanded. The system facilitated the fastest period of global economic growth in human history. But here's the thing about systems built for specific conditions. When the conditions change, the system eventually has to change too. Fast forward to 2025. The world has changed dramatically. The countries that had economies in shambles in 1945, many are now called rising tigers or emerging markets or just major economies, period. Germany rebuilt and became an industrial powerhouse. Japan too. South Korea went from war-torn poverty to technological leadership. China transformed from agricultural society to the world's second largest economy and largest trading nation. India's economy is massive and growing. Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, the list goes on. And here is what matters. There is no deficit of currencies that can back global supply and demand transaction in any volumes today. The euro, the yuan, the yen, multiple currencies backed by major economies with deep markets and solid fundamentals. The unique conditions that made the dollar the only option, they no longer exist. So what we're watching isn't a collapse, it's an evolution. The system that emerged from 1945's specific circumstances is adapting to 2025's very different circumstances. And this is where it gets interesting, because systems just don't evolve smoothly. There is friction, resistance, attempts to preserve the status quo even when the underlying conditions have shifted. Previously, if a country decided to trade in something other than the dollar, there were consequences, economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, and yes, in some cases, more direct forms of persuasion, like aircraft carrier strike groups showing up on your coastline sending a message, right? The system works a certain way. Stay in the system. And for decades, that worked. Because where else were you going to go? What alternative did you have? But today, it's becoming increasingly difficult to maintain that approach for both internal and external reasons. Internally, the US faces its own challenges, debt levels, political polarization, infrastructure needs, domestic priorities pulling resources and attention. The capacity to project power globally while maintaining domestic pressures is more constrained than it was. But the external reasons? That's where the real shift is happening, and one of the key external factors is BRICS. Not because BRICS is anti-American, no. Not because they're trying to destroy the dollar, but because they're building alternatives, options, parallel systems that let countries trade, invest, and develop without depending exclusively on dollar-denominated frameworks. And once alternatives exist, the math changes completely. Let's talk about what BRICS actually is and why it matters. BRICS started as an acronym: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and investment bankers' term for emerging markets worth watching. Then it became an actual grouping, then a political bloc. Now it's evolving into something more, an alternative framework for international relations and trade. And it's expanding. Saudi Arabia is in discussions, Egypt joined, Iran's in, UAE, Ethiopia, and over 40 other countries have expressed interest. Now, here's what makes this different from previous attempts at alternative systems. BRICS isn't ideological. It's not capitalism versus communism or democracy versus authoritarianism. It's practical. It's about, can we trade with each other in our own currencies? Can we rebuild infrastructure through alternative financing? Can we develop without needing permission from institutions based in Washington? The strategy is straightforward: inclusion, investment, infrastructure. China builds ports in Pakistan, railways in Kenya, power plants in Brazil. Not charity, business. But business with different terms than traditional Western financing. Less political conditionality, longer repayment periods, infrastructure that stays after the loan is paid. Russia provides energy to China and India, not at Western prices or through Western mechanisms, but through bilateral agreements that work for both sides. India offers pharmaceutical, manufacturing, and IT services. Brazil offers agricultural expertise and biofuels technology. South Africa offers mineral resources and mining expertise. Each member brings something. And crucially, they are building systems that don't require dollar intermediation. Payment systems like CIPS in China and SPFS in Russia that let countries settle transactions without routing through SWIFT or US banks. Currency swap agreements that let two countries trade directly in yuan, rupee, real, ruble, whatever combination makes sense. The new development bank as an alternative to the World Bank and IMF. Same function, different governance. No single country has veto power. Decisions are more distributed. And here is what's fascinating. These aren't theoretical projects. They are operational. Billions of dollars of trade already flow through these channels. Infrastructure projects worth trillions are underway or planned. Is it perfect? No. BRICS has internal tensions. China's economy dwarfs the others, creating imbalances and making other smaller countries nervous. Russia and India has different strategic priorities. Brazil's domestic politics shift. These are real challenges. But what matters is the alternative exists and it functions. Countries can now say, thanks for the offer, but we'll go with the BRICS option instead. Or better yet, we'll work with both systems and choose what serves us best for each situation. That optionality, that's the revolution. Not tanks rolling through streets, not ideological confrontation, just options where none existed before. And once countries have options, they use them. They negotiate better terms, they diversify relationships, they hedge their bets. That's just rational behavior. Look at the Middle East. Traditionally, Gulf states pegged currencies to the dollar, sold oil in dollars, invested surplus in U.S. treasuries, total integration with the dollar system. Now, Saudi Arabia is discussing yuan-denominated oil sales. UAE is balancing relationship between Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. These aren't hostile acts. They're diversification, risk management, adaptation to a world where multiple systems exist. Southeast Asia, same pattern. Countries maintaining security relationships with the U.S. while deepening economic ties with China and participating in BRICS-aligned institutions, playing multiple sides because they can. Latin America? After decades of being told their political choices were unacceptable, many are now working with whoever offers the best deal. Chinese infrastructure investments, Russian energy partnerships, Indian pharmaceutical supply, American technology. Take all of it. Why choose when you don't have to? Africa? For the first time since decolonization, African countries have leverage. Multiple partners competing for resources and influence. That means better deals, more investment, less conditionality. This is the multipolar moment, not because someone declared it, but because the practical alternatives emerged and proved viable. And trying to stop countries from using alternatives through threats, that just accelerates the search for those very alternatives. It validates the need for backup systems. This is why the warships off the coast of Venezuela and the strong rhetoric aren't having the same effect they used to. Not because military power disappeared, but because economic and political alternatives exist now. The cost of defying pressure has dropped. And so did the benefit of compliance. And so did compliance. It's not personal. It's not ideological. It's just math. So, we've got one system that's been dominant for 80 years and new systems emerging. What does that transition actually look like? Because it's not smooth. It can't be. Think about it like this. The dollar-based system isn't just a currency. It's a whole infrastructure, banking relationships, trade agreements, debt denominated in dollars, pricing benchmarks in dollars, entire industries built around dollar flows. You can't just flip a switch and change all that overnight. It's embedded in millions of contracts, trillions in assets, decades of institutional relationships. So what happens when countries start moving away from that system? Pressure, attempts to preserve it. And that's what we're seeing now. Not evil behavior, not irrational behavior, just the predictable response of a system trying to maintain itself against changing conditions. Economic sanctions become more frequent, because if countries can be punished for leaving the system, maybe others won't leave. The logic makes sense from within the system. But here is the paradox. The more sanctions get used, the more countries need alternatives to the system that can sanction them. It's self-reinforcing in the opposite direction. Russia gets sanctioned heavily. Expected outcome? Economy collapses, government capitulates. Actual outcome? Russia pivots to alternative trading partners, builds alternative payment systems, and 3 years later is still functioning. Different than before, but functioning. Every country watching that learns Sanctions are survivable if you have alternatives. So the incentive to build alternatives increases. Iran's been under sanctions for decades. They've built an entire economic approach designed to function outside the Western system. Are they thriving? No. But are they complying? Also no. They've adapted. Venezuela, similar story. Sanctions were expected to change government behavior. Instead, the government found alternative partners and built alternative systems. The intended outcome did not materialize. Now, I'm not making moral judgment about these governments. I'm just observing the tool that was supposed to force compliance isn't forcing compliance, and that has implications. When economic pressure doesn't work and diplomatic pressure doesn't work, what's left? Military pressure, demonstrations of force, gunboat diplomacy. And historically, that worked. A carrier group off your coast was a clear message backed by undeniable capability. Fall in line. But in 2025, it's more complicated. Militarily intervening in Venezuela, Iran, even medium-sized countries, the costs would be enormous. Domestic political support is uncertain. International legitimacy is questionable. And the outcome is unpredictable. So the carrier groups still deploy. The rhetoric still comes. But everyone knows the actual use of force is unlikely. Which means it's posturing. Still symbolically important, but practically limited. Meanwhile, the countries being pressured have learned to function under pressure. They've built resilience, found partners, created workarounds. It's like trying to dam a river. You can do it for a while, but if the water keeps rising and finding new channels, eventually the dam either gets overwhelmed or you have to acknowledge the river is going around you. The global economy is that river. It flows where it needs to flow. And if the traditional channels get blocked, it finds new ones. This doesn't mean the dollar is disappearing tomorrow. It won't. It still is the most widely held reserve currency, the deepest financial markets, the most liquid instruments. Those advantages don't evaporate quickly, but they are eroding slowly, consistently. A Chinese-Saudi oil deal here, a Russian-Indian trade agreement there, European companies setting up yuan payment systems, central banks diversifying reserves away from dollar-heavy portfolios. Each move is small, but they accumulate, and the trend line is clear. The world is deliberately, gradually reducing its exclusive dependence on the dollar system. Not because the dollar is bad, but because exclusive dependence on anything is risky, and if that system can be weaponized against you, the risk is especially high. Every finance minister who watched Russian central bank reserves get frozen had the same thought. That's legally held money, suddenly inaccessible. If it can happen to them, it can happen to us. How do we hedge that risk? The answer is diversification. Hold multiple currencies, develop alternative payment channels, build backup relationships. Basic prudence. But when every country does basic prudence simultaneously, the cumulative effect is transformative. The system changes not because anyone chose to change it, but because millions of individual risk management decisions pointed the same direction. That's where we are, in the friction zone. One system still dominant but declining. Alternative systems growing but not yet fully formed. Countries navigating between them, trying to maintain relationships with both while preparing for either. It's awkward. It's uncertain. It's going to be messy for a while, but it's happening. Alright, so let's get concrete. What does all this actually mean for how the world works? First, trade patterns are shifting. For decades, global trade flowed through predictable channels. Resources from the global south to manufacturing hubs to consumer markets in the west. Payments in dollars. Financing through Western banks. That model is fragmenting. Now you've got south-south trade bypassing traditional routes. China buying Brazilian soybeans paid in yuan, financed through Chinese banks. Russia selling energy in India, paying in rupees through bilateral arrangements. The same goods still move, but the money flows differently. The intermediaries are different. The currency denominations are different. For businesses, this means more complexity. You can't just assume dollar pricing anymore. You need to understand multiple currency systems, multiple payment channels, multiple regulatory frameworks. But it also means more options. If one market closes, others exist. If one financing source dries up, alternatives are available. Second, the leverage in international relations is redistributing. Countries that were traditionally rule takers are becoming rule makers in their own spheres. Saudi Arabia can tell both Washington and Beijing, we'll work with whoever offers better terms. That's unprecedented. A leverage for a country that used to operate within clear constraints. Turkey can play NATO, Russia, and China against each other, extracting benefits from all sides. Is it risky? Sure. But it's possible in ways it wasn't before. Smaller countries in Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, they're negotiating harder, getting better deals, demanding more respect because they have alternatives now. This doesn't mean the US lost all influence. Far from it. American military capability is still unmatched. American technology still leads in many areas. American markets still matter enormously. But it's one form of influence among several, not the only form that matters. That's the shift. Third, we're seeing institutional fragmentation. The post-World War II institutions that govern global affairs, they're not disappearing. They are no longer the only game in town. The World Bank and IMF still matter, but so does the New Development Bank and Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Different governance structures, different priorities, different leading terms. The UN Security Council still matters, but so do organizations like Shanghai Cooperation Organization and regional groupings that make decisions without waiting for Security Council approval. SWIFT is still the dominant payment messaging system, but CIPS is growing, SFPS exists, cryptocurrency rails are being explored, alternatives are operational. For every major international institution, there is now at least one alternative or parallel structure, sometimes competing, sometimes complementary, but always offering a choice. Fourth, and this is huge for regular people, the cost of everything is becoming less predictable. When the dollar was unquestionably dominant, pricing was relatively stable. Oil priced in dollars, commodities priced in dollars. Everyone knew where they stood. Now, if major oil producers start accepting yuan, what happens to dollar-denominated oil prices? If rare earth minerals get priced in alternative currencies, what happens to technology costs? If international supply chains reorganize around multiple financial systems, what happens to shipping costs? Nobody knows exactly. We are figuring it out in real time. This could mean more volatility, prices swinging as markets adjust to new realities. That's challenging for businesses planning investments and for households managing budgets. It could mean more competition, keeping prices lower, as suppliers have more options for selling and buyers more options for purchasing. Probably some of both, depending on the commodity and the region. Fifth, technology is increasingly fragmenting along geopolitical lines. The internet was supposed to be global. Now we've got different internets in different regions with different rules. Technology standards are diverging. 5G built by Huawei works differently than 5G built by Ericsson. Digital payment systems are multiplying. Cloud services are localizing. For innovation, this could be good. Competition drives improvement. Multiple approaches mean multiple solutions. But for interoperability, it's challenging. Sixth, expect more uncertainty around international law and norms. When one power was clearly dominant, there was de facto enforcement of certain standards. Imperfect, inconsistent, but present. In a multipolar world, enforcement is distributed. Multiple powers with different interests and different interpretations of what rules should be. That could mean more chaos. More situations where no clear authority exists to resolve disputes. Or it could mean more negotiation, more compromise, more genuine multilateralism instead of hegemonic rule setting. Again, probably some of both. The point is, we're in transition. The old system is eroding. The new system is forming. And nobody has the final blueprint yet. That's simultaneously exciting and unsettling. Exciting because rigid systems are opening up. Unsettling because stable systems are becoming fluid. How you feel about it probably depends on where you sit and what you need from the global system. So, where does this go? Let me sketch 3 possible futures based on current trajectories. Path 1. Managed multipolarity. The major powers accept that unipolarity is over and work out frameworks for coexistence. Not perfect cooperation, not friendship necessarily, but functional management of competition. Clear spheres of influence get acknowledged. The Western Hemisphere for the US, Eurasia for Russia and China. Everyone agrees not to mess with core interests, competes everywhere else. Multiple financial systems coexist. Countries use whichever makes sense for specific transactions. Some international transactions stay dollar-denominated. Others use yuan, euro, rupee, or even new instruments like BRICS currency if it emerges. Global problems that require coordination like climate change, pandemic response, oceans management still get some level of cooperation because everyone suffers if they don't. Technology fragments but maintains some interoperability standards because commerce requires it. It's not the unified world of the late 20th century, but it's not chaos either. It's managed diversity, structured competition, coordination where necessary, competition where possible. Chances of this? Maybe 30–40%. It requires wisdom and restraint from all major powers. Possible, but not guaranteed. Path 2. Fragmented world. The major powers can't agree on frameworks. Every negotiation breaks down. Every institution splits. The world divides into competing blocks with minimal interaction. Western bloc, BRICS bloc, maybe others forming around regional powers, countries forced to choose sides. Trade barriers go up, technology becomes incompatible, travel gets harder, and it's not war, but it's not peace either. It's permanent Cold War, but messier because the lines aren't as clear as they were in the 20th century. Innovation slows because talent and ideas can't move freely. Costs rise because efficiency of global supply chains is lost. Problems that need global cooperation don't get solved. It's economically costly, diplomatically exhausting, militarily tense because mistakes have fewer buffers. Chances of this? Unfortunately, maybe 40–50%. It's where current trends are heading now, unless something shifts significantly. Path 3. Chaotic transition. Miscalculations compound, a maritime incident escalates, a sanctions regime triggers collapse of a nuclear-armed state, proxy wars go direct, small fires merge. The transition from unipolarity to multipolarity happens through crisis. Regional conflicts spreading, alliance systems triggering. Nobody wants full escalation, but nobody knows how to de-escalate. Economic disruption, supply chains breaking, financial contagion, political instability cascading. Whether it stays conventional or goes nuclear is anyone's guess. Either way, the costs are enormous. Lives, infrastructure, decades of development lost. I'm not predicting this. I don't think anyone wants this. Surely not me. But when you combine declining powers that haven't accepted decline, rising powers that feel constrained, and medium powers being pressured, accidents happen. And in a nuclear world, accidents are existential. Chances? Hopefully 10–20%. But non-zero, and that's worth taking seriously. So which path we take depends on decisions being made right now in Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Brussels, New Delhi, Brasilia, and dozens of other capitals. As observers, we can't control those decisions, but we can understand the forces in play. We can see the patterns, we can prepare ourselves, and maybe, just maybe, understanding can influence. If enough people understand what's happening and why, that changes the political pressures leaders face. That's why analysis matters, why Eagle's view exists. Not to predict the future, no, but to understand the present clearly enough that better futures become possible. So when you see headlines about naval exercises or trade agreements or currency swaps, or diplomatic tensions, you will have context. You're not watching heroes versus villains. You're watching systems adapting to changed conditions. Imperfectly, messily, sometimes dangerously, but understandably. The world that emerged from 1945 unique circumstances is evolving into something that fits 2025's very different circumstances. How that evolution happens, how smooth or chaotic it is, that's still being determined. We're living through a historical transition. Not the end of anything, not the beginning of anything, just transition from one configuration to another. And, my friends, understanding that helps. Reduces anxiety, increases clarity, lets you navigate uncertainty with more confidence. This has been Eagle's View. I'm your host. Thanks for thinking through this with me. If this resonated, subscribe, share it, and if the uncertainty is getting to you, if watching systems shift is affecting your peace of mind, remember that call I mentioned. Let's talk about building real resilience, not just intellectual understanding, but genuine emotional stability. The link is in the description. Until next time, stay curious, stay observant, stay balanced. Keep watching the bigger picture, because the world is shifting. Make sure you understand how. Bye for now.